Welcome to the DE Talk podcast. Tune in for dialogue between HR experts to amp up your HR strategies. Don't worry, we'll mix in a few laughs as we know you need it. This is Candy Chambers, and you're listening to another episode of the DE Talk podcast. At Direct Employers, we talk a lot about hiring service members injured during combat and providing accommodations to those talented individuals. Today's podcast touches on a topic that we don't discuss nearly enough: military caregivers, the unsung heroes of our nation's wounded service members. We are fortunate to have Stephanie Howard, the executive producer, director, and writer of the documentary film The Weight of Honor, join us today. I don't want to give too much away, but The Weight of Honor is the first comprehensive documentary to chronicle the lives of the caregivers and families of veterans severely injured in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. This documentary really pulled at my heartstrings when I first saw it, and I have to say it painted such a vivid picture of the challenges these caregivers face and how their lives have changed. I could go on, but first let me welcome you to our podcast, Stephanie.
Thank you, Candy. I'm really delighted to be here.
Well, we are very excited to have you join us as well. I've enjoyed our conversations every time we've spoken, so we'll give everyone else a chance to get to know you as well. So let's get started.
Right. Thank you.
You've had a 25-year career in broadcast journalism. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how that led you to documentary filmmaking?
You know, I was thinking about it, and I have never wanted to be anything else. I've always wanted to be a journalist, and I have a degree in broadcast journalism, and I had internships, with some very well-known networks, some really great places. I've had jobs in markets big and small, and really what brought me to documentaries is something that I knew early on, that your typical news story, if you're lucky, is a minute and 20 seconds.
Wow.
Usually they're 30 seconds or less. It's really hard to cover a topic in that amount of time. I frequently would ask and get to do multi-part series, hour-long specials. I would get to work on those kinds of things because I felt like I could really dive into an issue, really look at different aspects of what make that an issue. So documentaries were a transition for me. I had to get to a point where I had paid my dues enough to where I could do documentaries. And that's where that really comes from.
Okay. It's funny, documentaries can cover so many different topics, and this one, I tell you, really did a number on me. So I can't wait to have you talk a little bit more about it. Do you have any family members that have a military background, or do you have any military background?
No, not really. My father was in the Air Force in the JAG Corps, and was out of the service just around the time I was born. And I did not serve. I mean, it just, I think now if I were to look back on it, I might. But no, the answer is probably a simple no.
I met a wounded veteran one time. I say wounded. He was a quadriplegic, and he had various, prostheses. But he said he didn't like being called a wounded service member or a wounded warrior. And I said, well, what do you want to be called? And he goes, Travis. And that was his name. And, we don't really hear a lot about, the issues that they go through. I mean, there's a lot of focus placed on wounded service members, but we don't understand the actual difficulties that they face or the struggles that they have to overcome. So what drew you to creating a documentary about military caregivers and the journeys that they face?
By the way, I think I know who you're talking about.
Travis Mills.
What drew me, as a journalist, as a filmmaker, I'm just naturally curious, and I'm always looking. I think I was in a place where I was really looking for my next film, and I was trying to find something that struck a chord in me. And I came to this because I had met a group of wounded vets who came to speak here in my hometown in California, Santa Clarita. And they spoke to the students at the junior high and the high school. I had a son at each one of those. And the interesting thing was they did not speak about their wounds. They did not. They spoke about what it was like to be different. That really resonated with those students. I saw it in person, and I thought, wow, you know. And I thought about doing something about that, but, you know, there are and there were so many films about returning service members, especially the wounded. And I just felt like I'm not in a position to say anything new. I just didn't feel comfortable with that. I felt like I didn't have the wherewithal in so many areas. And a friend of mine who was involved in that program to bring those vets to our town said, well, no one has done anything about their caregivers. And at first I said, well, the doctors and nurses. She goes, no, the spouses, the families. And I thought about it and started doing research. And yes, that resonated with me because as you and I have talked about what you just said, Candy, no one really knows that much about these people.
Not
about the families, right? And when you make a documentary, when you make a film, part of that is shining light on a subject that no one really knows about or knows very little about. So that was a long answer to your very short question.
No, it was a very effective answer too. I think you're giving people some thoughts as to what the documentary really is about. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But, you know, as you just said, there isn't really much discussion about what it's like to be a caregiver. What did you find was the most compelling about those individuals that, you know, as you put together their stories that shaped the documentary?
You know, I was just so impressed with their determination. Their resilience, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about resilience because we could make this as a film about, oh, these poor people. Mm-hmm. But that's a negative. A positive is, yes, they're going through a lot, but look what they're coming up with. Look how determined they are. Look how much they love the person who they're trying to help. And I was so impressed by that resiliency. The other part was I was so happy, but also almost surprised that they were so outspoken.
Yeah, they were. The part that really hit me was how they are playing the hand they're dealt, you know, and they didn't go into their marriages in any of the situations. I think one of them did, but the others, you know, they certainly didn't expect to find themselves in this position, and they handled it, and that speaks volumes for them. So I'm sure you probably have plenty of warming stories to tell about some of these people that you worked with. But one statistic.
You know,
go
Candy,
ahead.
can I step in right there because you and I have talked before. If something like this happened to you or to me.
I thought about that. Yep.
Right. Well, haven't we all?
Yep.
If my husband or anyone, if this happened to them, would I walk away? If he were violent and wanted to kill me, okay, maybe. but you do, and I know this from being a caregiver as a mom, you do what has to be done. You don't step away. And yes, I respect these people so much, and they have gone above and beyond, just like you said. But wouldn't we
do the same thing?
Step in there.
Well, you know, my husband has several medical issues, and he had thoracic aneurysm surgery a couple of years ago and had a really long recovery. And I literally would go home at lunch and fix him lunch. I would fix breakfast. I would come home, cook dinner, and he's retired, which was fine and good, but I'd have to come home and take out the pets and, you know, and things like that. And so, I work a lot of hours, and I changed my travel schedule, you know, I mean, and I would have my neighbors come over if I couldn't change my travel schedule. And you know, you do what you have to do, you know, and I think we probably, just sitting here talking about it, aren't really focusing on the love that they have for that individual, especially when, as we all know, when people are in difficult physical situations, they can get pretty difficult to work with too, because they're frustrated. And so, that I think with the people that they had to take care of, the wounded service members, they weren't, for the most part, going to get any better. They weren't going to, have a change of their condition. So this was something they were going to have to go through, the rest of their lives, basically. So,
right. I think one of the goals has always been to get them to a point where they're as stable as possible.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, I think there were a couple of them that I think, one of them that was, and another that I know that you have said since has come around and gotten better. Let's talk about one of the statistics that really hit home for me when I watched the documentary. Over the last 13 years, only 1% of the U.S. population served in the military, and that just kind of blew me away. That leaves a really huge disconnect between the civilian communities and the service members. And how did that statistic fuel your drive to create the documentary and share the caregiver stories?
I didn't have that exact number going in. It was said in the film. We had it in our research. I think more than anything, it explained to me why we had multiple deployments. I could not figure that out. Why would someone go back to battle 3, 4, 5, some 6, maybe more times? Because let's face it, that increased your odds to, of being injured, sometimes severely injured. And this is the price of an all-volunteer army. I'm not going to argue it either way. That in the film, even we had someone who says in Vietnam, because of the draft, everybody knew someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew someone. And being in war was much more familiar. I felt like we were getting reports and we heard things on the news, but we didn't have that connection with, and we still really don't with Iraq and Afghanistan. I think it's sort of surreal, and I think that's why people they don't have that firsthand experience with anyone who's served.
And I am kind of surprised at how true that statement is. There are some people that are all in with veterans, and here at DE, we work with NASWA and we work with the Career One Stops with all the levers and DVOPs, and so we're, that's part of our mission is to help veterans get civilian employment. But a lot of people that don't have anyone in their family, who has served, they don't really understand, and that's where I think this will be a good documentary for people to see whether or not they have military family members, friends, or anything, because this opens up a whole new world to some of the issues that they probably didn't even know existed. So another statistic you brought up was that there are 1.1 million family caregivers for since the 9/11, actually post 9/11 veterans. And I'm just curious, with people like that spread out all over the country, how did you find the participants that, both the wounded service members and the caregivers that were really willing to, open up their lives and share those intimate moments and experiences with you and with the world and allow themselves to be filmed? How'd you do that?
This is where the journalism background came in, because part of being a good journalist is research. And identifying the people who can lead you to more information. So that took a lot of work. I probably spent a good year or so just doing research. Wow. And connecting with people who, I never made a cold call, just so you know that. Mm-hmm. I always researched and identified individuals who were working with military families or new military families, either through volunteering through the VA or volunteering as part of a nonprofit for caregivers, that kind of thing. And I used these sources in a way where I said, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm looking for families, for caregivers who would be interested in participating. And sometimes I would hear back right away, and sometimes it would take weeks or months. And of course, I kept calling them and bugging them, and because that's also part of being a good journalist. You don't say, "Okay, I'll go away." And the people that we use in the film are really a fraction of who we interviewed. We had to find people who would agree to let us participate and who would want to be with us. And every single person we did speak to, no matter what, said that I would ask them, why? And they would say, because we feel it's really, really important for the private sector, for the public to understand that we exist, that we even exist. And that's the goal of the film.
You know what, Stephanie? We were talking about, getting ready to do this podcast, and I made the comment to someone that these are the type of people that employers would love to hire, these caregivers, because, actually once I remember the one lady who had, young children, and she was constantly running, taking care of the kids, her husband, and going in 14 different directions. But, once those kids get old enough to go to school, and with all of the remote work that everyone's doing, I honestly, I think there are probably a zillion companies that would love to reach out and give her a job, a remote job, working from home. She could easily, do something outside of her caregiver responsibilities, because these women, or, I'm sure there's plenty of male caregivers, but I'll tell you what, those are the type of people companies want to hire. Because they we always talk about how a mother is her organizational skills. The more children she has, the more the better her organization skills. That particular woman who's in the film has children who are now preschool and school age, and for a good year or so, she was working at a preschool through her church. Okay. And so, when we have an added layer here with the pandemic, and you and I should probably speak again when schools reopen. But the added layer is finding a job where they can work remotely. But you do find that these are people who know how to juggle a schedule. And you may need to set, if you're an employer and you may need to set a Zoom call at a certain time, then you need to be understanding that might be the time they have to go pick up the kids. And know that this is a valuable employee who's not going to just say, oh, well, I didn't have to do that. They're going to come back after the kids go to bed, and they're going to be working long hours to meet the expectations that you may have. But as an employer, it's really important to understand what their schedule is and what that means. And let me just say one other story, and I just heard about this yesterday. I called one of our caregivers because she has participated, actually most recently on a Zoom call that we did, a big conference discussion. Her name is Lindsay, and I said, well, Lindsay, tell me about how you got your job, and because we're talking tomorrow about HR, and she said, you know what, I had to quit. Aww. She said she was in the front office, she was meeting and greeting people, she was answering phones, and in the pandemic, she can't do that. She has a husband who has lost both of his legs and then some. She has 2 small children, and she said if she could have done it at home, she would have. Yeah. So this is someone who's really bright. I think she has a master's degree. Oh, geez.
In communication. This is someone who would be ideal she could work from home.
Well, you know what,
right?
Stephanie? See, when people take advantage of watching this film, maybe they'll be calling you and saying, "Hey, can I have her contact information because I'd like to hire her?" I mean, a lot of our members are still working remote, and we're still working remote, and we have a few people. I mean, obviously, I'm in the office, and I come into the office anyway, but Jordan is here filming recording this for us. But people come in when they need to. But most of the world, in a lot of corporate jobs, are still working remote. So, and I think, and I'm speaking from my own personal standpoint, but I've learned a lot about how much can still get accomplished when people are working remote. And I think a lot of companies are proving that they are now more accepting of that work style. And I think there's going to be a lot of better opportunities for caregivers and folks that really have to be home to get some work accomplished. So maybe when we get people to watch the documentary, they'll like I said, they'll contact you and say, "Hey, I want to interview her." So anyway, one thing that I think everyone is at least somewhat aware of is that service members are, for the most part, are very private, and they don't really talk about their wartime experiences, and they don't even cover that with their family members, their closest friends, and then to have them actually talk to you, who is basically a total stranger, and then knowing that they had to open up and share all of their stories for a film, was that a challenge?
Well, of course it
trust,
was.
Obviously.
Yeah, there was one family, we spent a lot of time with them. They were going to be a main story thread. And she called me up at one point after we'd spent days with a camera crew with her. And she said, "You know what, we just can't do this.
Oh,
it's just, we're uncomfortable." And, there was a discussion. Well, they'd already signed their releases, and technically I could have put them in the film. But I'm not going to do that.
You're not that person, Stephanie. I can tell you that.
No, and I mean, most of us aren't, let's face it. And to do a film like this, of course you're not. And, I still, when I see Nikki, we're friends on Facebook, stuff like that. But once again, not only did they want people to know of who military caregivers are, because let me tell you, at this point, they're not on base. They're not on a military installation. They're not within that close military community. And I know a lot of the people within that community were supportive, but they ended up with another kind of community, which was caregivers are severely wounded. Mm-hmm. And they stay in touch, and they have stayed in touch. But it wasn't easy because I was not military. If I came in as military, there would probably be more of a sense of, they would be more trusting. One of the many reasons I did work with sources rather than going directly were almost all of these people were military themselves, or they were veterans. They could speak that language. They understood that. But at the same time, they understood what I was trying to achieve. And they were champions of that because they could see how important it was.
Well, I agree with you on that. I also, though, think about when you started the whole documentary, and it talks, or each scene kind of talked about what the caregiver went through when they found out about their loved one's injuries. And I think about having to relive some of those horrible moments. How did you take those real personal, detailed accounts of what they had gone through and put them into what was perfectly edited clips? To maintain that story. I guess now I'm talking more about not just your journalistic background, but your maybe your directing background, your writing background, because you obviously have some talents there, Stephanie. How did you do that? Okay.
I have to give a huge shout out to my editor, Alejandro Valdez Roshan. He's also my co-editor. The reason is this: we wrote the film in the edit bay. Alejandro narrowed it down because I had multitudes. I had so many interviews. He narrowed it down to the stories he felt were most complete. Also, he is the one who said, we need to make this 56 minutes. We need to make it an hour. And I said, well, why? He said, because it will be concise and it will be compact. I said, are we going to miss anything? He said, no, we won't. And he was great because he was coming in from a second set of eyes. And he was saying, okay, this person is a great story, but she wasn't really the caregiver. This person is a great story, but she wasn't really the caregiver. And he worked hard to make it very well-rounded. So what would happen is we would go through and talk about the stories. Alejandro would edit for a few days, and then I would come in. And we needed to, what you have to do a lot in documentary and in news is you need to see how the different sound bites, what people say, play off one another. So, for example, if you said to me, I don't know, something like, wow, that you must have a car that you really like. And then, say, one of my neighbors said, you know, that car looks like it doesn't go very fast. So we have these people talking to one another almost, responding to one another, because there's no narration to fill in. That was really important to me. We're going to let these people speak for themselves because it's their stories. And Alejandro is an artist. He's a craftsman. We worked really hard together. We worked together something like 6-8 months and really found that story and at the same time the craft. Because when you hear some of the things that people say in the film that make you kind of step back handy and go, wow, we didn't do the rat-a-tat-tat-tat that you might see on another subject. Mm-hmm. What I constantly said to Alejandro, and he did this, we needed to give space. We need to give breathing room. If someone says something rather shocking, really intimate, we needed to give space before we went to hear the next person or next piece of film. We needed to offer that up. And that is part of storytelling. You adjust to what your subject is.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you did a masterful job at that, Stephanie. Both of you did. So it's good to know about him. I think I remember seeing his name, but I didn't realize the huge impact he had on the development of the film. So you spent about 5 years with all of these individuals. How would you describe the various roles that the caregivers play each day, and how did you, or what was the most surprising thing that you learned?
I think it's sort of what I said before. Any one of us, they did the best they could. They researched. They understood. They knew what they had to do for the various kinds of ones. And to me, that was commitment, to go above and beyond and not just slap on a bandage, which they never could. But we look at different kinds of wounds, right? We look at, in the film, we look at people with severe burns. That's another set of caregiving. Mm-hmm. We look at people with multiple amputations and burns, some of them. And there are different kinds of caregiving there. We meet a family that has invisible wounds. He has really severe traumatic brain injury.
Right.
And, you know, this huge personality change. So what I saw was commitment. Gina, who is the wife in that story, says, look, it's not that I'm going to break my marriage vows. Why would I? He didn't do something on purpose to hurt me.
Right, right. Exactly.
He is my husband. I love him. I'm his caregiver. Well, that was when we did the interview, and I am in touch with just about everybody.
I was going to ask you
They
that.
have a good time. They laugh together. At the end of the film, you can see they have a great relationship, and they know how to have fun.
Well, we comment around here a lot that it takes a village sometimes to, get things done or whatever. And I'm sure having that sounding board or just somebody to talk to and maybe ask for advice or someone who is sharing some of their difficulties or frustrations or anything is probably very helpful for them.
It is helpful, but I got a sense of this. I got a sense, and they told me in these words, they felt alone.
Oh, I'm sure.
Many times. Even, okay, for example, if they have family, frequently the family doesn't really participate. I'm talking about not their immediate family, the immediate family with the kids. That's huge. That's another story. And I talk about this being caregiver families because these children are caregivers.
Oh, I know that one young man or child actually walking down the hall with his dad. Yeah.
He was 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah,
again,
teeny tiny.
Yeah, well, and what you said, you step up to what you have to face, and boy, that 4-year-old, he did. That was pretty cool. How did their stories impact your life, Stephanie, or how did they change the way you see people?
Well, I think I look at people now and I go, that person's a caregiver, and they don't even realize it. I looked at myself. So I was talking about myself kind of when the camera was off or setting up with a family, and, the wife looked at me and she goes, you're telling me these things about your son, and it's really cool, but do you realize you're a caregiver? Mm-hmm. I'm like, she's right. Wow. How I see differently, how it's changed my life. Okay, here's a big thing. When someone works in news, I'm talking TV and radio news, we sort of keep things at arm's length. We automatically will put our distance between ourselves and the person we're interviewing, because you don't want to get too attached. You're not going to be objective, correct? And a documentary like this,
it's what I wish the journalists would do right now during the election.
Yeah, well,
I know. I'm sorry. It's like I'm tired.
I considered my job. Okay, so. But you do need to be, ethically, you do need to be at arm's length. Right. It's really important. And I found that I had to kind of work at that. My personality, my own ethics, the kind of person I am, didn't have that much trouble breaking that down. But from a professional point of view, I saw myself becoming personally involved with them, becoming more their friend. Yeah. They will still get in touch with me. Now that's a little, if I were a journalist and I did a story with someone and then they were contacting me and that's happened, I would be like a little freaked, right? But in this instance, I'm not. I've interviewed them multiple times.
Well, Stephanie, in the time you and I have gotten to know each other, you are a very open and welcoming person. And I'm sure that you were probably kind of a nice outlet for them, and it's somebody that they obviously had to build up some trust in you or they would never have told their stories. So, I mean, I certainly understand about how you'd be a little freaked if somebody wanted to have a relationship and you're like, okay, I was just doing a story for my job.
Yeah, really. But this is really important for me to say, and you might have been asking about this, but every single person I interviewed, remember, not everyone made it into the film. A lot of it was because of time. Mm-hmm. It's more than 1:20, but it's still 56 minutes. every single one said that the interview was cathartic.
Oh, I'm sure.
They said because, and the reason, and is because no one had asked them these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, multiple times, they would break down crying. I would break down crying. And I could hear, the burly cameraman, one of them being my husband, at different locations, like going, and the crew going, and at some point, when we did turn off the camera, because it's really kind of an unspoken rule, you try to keep that camera going, because that's when you get the real stuff.
Exactly.
So we would eventually turn it off, and they would just, collapse, and I would say, look, I feel bad. I didn't come here because I wanted to upset you and get that on camera. That is not my intention at all. And they'd say, no, I'm really glad you're asking me these questions. No one has asked me before.
Well, you know what? And I think that's incredibly important because it made it so authentic, and you can tell the difference between, a story that's being told just without any real solid input from characters that are actually involved. It's not just a story about, caregivers. It's a story involving actual caregivers, and it's different. And I think, they had made an interesting comment that, the military trains you, informs you, they prepare you in case, your loved one is killed, but they don't tell you about, what to do or how to take care of some service member who becomes, has a traumatic injury. And it sounds like you wanted to actually show that. Let me ask though, was there a noticeable difference for you in the level of caregiving that one caregiver had to take on as opposed to others? Did you notice that when you were interviewing these
I'm not getting your question. I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
Yeah. Could you can you elaborate on the experiences they shared regarding the level of caregiving that was required? Because maybe one caregiver didn't have as much that she had to do as someone else.
I don't think you can make those comparisons. Every single person in the film, and when people watch it, they will see every single person has a different story, and really the film is a vehicle for their stories. They have different family dynamics, they have a different relationship dynamic. The wounds are different, and that in itself really speaks to what they needed to do to get by. How many children? What are the ages of those children? Do they have support from parents, in-laws? Was there a friend who really stepped in? Level of caregiving, I don't know. Am I understanding your question correctly?
Yeah, you are. I know that, one caregiver said that, caring for her husband was an all day around the clock job. Another spoke to just it being a long road, but their spouse was independent, and I think though you showed very effectively different life situations, because I remember the one young man whose mother had to take care of him. And, you think about when your children grow up, you don't expect them to be home, and relying on you to take care of them. You expect them to go out and build their own life, and so that was a different situation. It wasn't a spouse that was taking care of the service member. It was the mother. And, you're a mother just like I am, Stephanie. And, we deal with our children differently than we've ever probably dealt with our spouse, and you have different motivations for your children as opposed to a spouse that would, have to deal with that as well. So I was just curious, if you.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if this is off topic, but I was thinking about this when I was talking before. These wars are different from any other wars we've ever fought because our medical advances are saving so many people, so many people in the field.
Yeah.
People who would have bled out or died in the field would not, in Vietnam even. And we're to the point now where if someone is injured on the battlefield, they get them to a field hospital, stabilize them, get them out of there to a hospital in Germany, the main military hospital, and stabilize them more so that they can get on the flight back to the United States. That could take a day. It could take a few days. It could take longer.
Oh, yeah.
But it always amazed me that within a few hours, they were in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few hours. And so we're seeing a level, and we talk about this in the film, we're seeing a level of injuries coming home we've never seen before. And the caregivers are the ones who are picking up the pieces on that. Even if it's all the hospitalizations, even if it's, the appointments, all the red tape for going through the VA, all of that, and insurance, all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And
that's going to be long term.
And nobody ever even thinks about that piece of it. The caregiving is such a big part of the whole situation that they're facing, and the paperwork, and all of that, the insurance, the appointments, nobody even thinks about that. So that's something else that is pretty evident. So given that part of your discussion, Stephanie, what do you hope that people take away from your film?
Well, okay, there are two goals, really. One is for people to understand that this really underserved community exists. I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong word, but I feel really strongly that they're underserved. I think
Elizabeth
as
Dole
we've
would
spoken,
agree.
that people don't see them.
I think
People don't see them.
I think Elizabeth Dole would agree with you. She does a lot for
and
caregivers.
Her Caregiver Foundation has worked a lot. The people her Caregiver Fellows, there are two from each state, work very hard lobbying and with legislators and with speaking with people in their communities. They're working on that. There are other organizations that are working directly with caregivers to offer support, to offer classes online, to offer support groups and one-on-one as well. Because a lot of these families live off the grid. They will live hours away from a metropolitan area, from a VA, because some of the service members just can't take being around a population. They can't. So I went off track here a little bit. We need to know that these military caregiver families are here, and we need to reach out to them. And the other thing is that I think I said this before, this is not a film about a negative. We're talking about the positive. Here are people who are committed, they're resilient, they're courageous. They don't want people to take pity on them. We want to show that they are an example that we can all live up to and we can be proud of.
Oh, that's a definite, accurately placed statement. It's something that you can't help but watch that film and sit back and just shake your head. And I mean, you're just so proud of what they are able to accomplish. But you started into an area that I was going to just ask, and this is basically the last question about the film, and then I have some fun things I'm going to ask you. But how can people that are listening to the podcast, who watch the film, what is it that they might be able to do to support the caregivers and their families? These caregivers never expected to, have an equal partnership with their spouse or a parent and a child. And now it's transitioned to caretaker and patient. And I don't think anyone ever expects to find themselves in that position. So What
You
can
know,
people
what
do?
we encourage, what we encourage is to go within their community, sometimes that could be your church or your synagogue or your mosque, and say, look, can we identify some families who we could maybe adopt, who we could help. I think if you're doing anything one-on-one, you don't ask someone, in any respect, you don't ask someone, oh, just let me know. No, you say, look, can I bring dinner once a week? Can we mow your lawn every 2 weeks? And if that is received, if the person who needs you accepts your help, you need to stick with it. You need to be committed. You can't mow their lawn twice and say, oh, I forgot. You need to do that. If you're going to bring meals, you have a circle and you do that. There is that commitment. But also, when people see the film, I often say it starts a discussion. And that's why, you and I are having this discussion now. That's why we have community screenings, because there are so many questions, and the film starts it, and it doesn't live well in a vacuum. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I love your suggestions. I mean, I think those are wonderful suggestions. I'm going to go back to my previous suggestion about employers and literally think about finding the caregivers in your general area or even anywhere really if you have remote work, and just see if you could help these caregivers have an outlet. And some of them, I think companies would be amazed at how much these people would accomplish, and they'd probably be phenomenal employees. So I'm going to add that to the thing that people can do. So
very good. I agree with you.
Well, good. So Stephanie, you and I hit it off when we first talked several months ago.
Yeah.
And I expect to be longtime friends. So I want to help other people get to know the real Stephanie Howard. So I'm going to end our conversation with some rapid
My
fire.
husband were on, he'd be going, no, Candy, stop there.
Maybe I should ask him the questions.
No, please don't.
Okay, well, I'm going to just have some fun rapid fire questions, and I want you to feel free to say the first thing that comes to mind. So I'm going to start. I've got 5 of them. So as a broadcast journalist, what has been the one story that you have covered that still sticks out in your mind today?
Wow, the LA riots.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just the visual of that, and to be here, and it's kind of sad. But when something is impacting you personally, just broke my heart, and had to pick up the pieces. And my job was to work with reporters coming in from other countries, and just people have a heart.
Yeah. No, I hadn't even thought about those, but yeah, I'm sure. So who inspires you?
That's easy. My 2 sons.
Oh.
They always have. They're now in their 20s. They always will.
Well, that's a neat answer. I think I would probably have to say that about my own children, but I never actually put that thought to them. So that was a great answer. Okay, e-reader or hardcover book? Which do you prefer?
Hardcover.
Yeah, isn't
Hardcover.
that funny? I have both, but I still like to have a book in my hand.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know why. Okay, so being from the Midwest, do you say pop or soda?
Soda.
Oh.
I've been in California a long time. If I said pop, people would look at me and go, what?
You know what? I've traveled California. My daughter even lived out there for a while, and I would ask for a pop, and you're right, they do look at you funny because I say pop, and I got teased way back when I was in high school when I was in Pennsylvania, and I said something about pop, and they're like, "What are you talking about? It's soda." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, it's always been pop to me." But
there you go.
So this is kind of an odd question probably right now with the pandemic, but what is your favorite travel destination if you could go?
If I could go, Israel. I've been a number of times.
Okay.
Very connected. That's international.
Right. No, that's...
Domestically, well, I could get there. Wyoming, the Grand Tetons are God's country. And, well, I guess Israel is too. But really, what I usually do is I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, because that's where I'm from and that's where my family is.
Wow. You know what? Now that's funny because I have always wanted to go to Wyoming. I've been to like 43 or 45 states, and you just named two that I've never been to, Nebraska and Wyoming. And I have always wanted to go to Wyoming. And I actually had somebody ask me to speak in Kansas one time. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I would love to. And the lady said, "You do realize I said Kansas, right?" I said, "Yeah, I've never been there." So, I mean, I would love to go to Wyoming, and I'd love to go to Nebraska. And I actually have some very good friends who are in Israel a lot. And I've heard that that's just a spectacular trip. And a friend of mine on Facebook just had like a 10-day trip there during this pandemic. So I was very surprised about that. So,
really?
Yeah.
Everything's closed down there now.
Well, it was several months ago, but yeah, it was probably before it was closed. But anyway, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today. We are incredibly humbled by your documentary and hope that we can bring more awareness to the struggles that military caregivers face. You've taken their stories.
You know, Candy, it's fun. It's always fun talking to you.
Well, thanks.
The questions were awesome.
Well, I have to give credit to Jamie Costello, who is our marketing phenom. She leads our marketing team, and she just is incredible with pulling together some outstanding questions to help pull the right information from our guests. So I think our listeners have learned a lot about you, and I really can't wait until they can watch the Weight of Honor and just learn more about what military caregivers go through. So for people that want to know, they can watch the film eventually in DE Academy. They can rent it from Amazon or download it on iTunes. I cannot tell you how strongly I recommend that you do that. You can also go to Stephanie's website, and it's www.theweightofhonormovie.com, and there you can learn more about the film and the caregivers and get all sorts of information. So I highly encourage you to do that. And Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been terrific.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm really, really glad that Direct Employers wants everyone to learn more about military caregivers. That's terrific.
Well, I think so too. So thanks again, Stephanie. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the DE Talk podcast. Stay connected with Direct Employers on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive notifications of new episodes each month.